You didn't wake up one day and decide to be someone's backup plan. That's the part nobody talks about. It didn't start with disrespect or obvious neglect. It started quietly, with consistency, with showing up, with answering the phone when they disappeared for a few days and came back like nothing happened. It started with you believing that patience was love and understanding was loyalty. And for a long time, you told yourself a story that made it hurt less. You said they were just slow to open up. You said they had walls. You said they needed time. But then there's always that moment, usually late at night, when you replay everything without lying to yourself, where the truth lands heavy. You weren't being slowly chosen. You were being carefully kept. You weren't the priority. You were the safety net, the emotional backup plan, the one who made them feel secure without ever demanding too much. And realizing that doesn't break you all at once. It breaks you in stages. First confusion, then self-doubt, then that sharp, quiet pain that says, that's what this was. What makes this realization so brutal isn't just that you were second, it's that you were good, you were consistent, you were real, and you still weren't chosen the way you deserved. And if you're honest, part of you wonders how someone could lean on you emotionally, come back to you for comfort, rely on your presence, and still keep you at arm's length when it mattered. That question sits heavy because the answer isn't flattering, but it is freeing. Avoidant attachment doesn't work the way people assume. It's not about not caring. It's about caring and panicking. It's about wanting closeness, but only on terms that never threaten independence. So avoidants don't keep backup plans because they're calculating villains. They keep them because backups feel safe. Backups don't demand. Backups don't trap. Backups don't force emotional decisions. Backups are there without asking for too much back. And without realizing it, you fit that role perfectly, not because you were weak, but because you were emotionally capable. Avoidants are drawn to people who regulate them, people who calm their nervous system, people who don't explode when communication drops or plans change. And that's why this hurts in a specific way, because you weren't chosen despite being good. You were kept because you were good. You made them feel stable without making them feel exposed. You offered connection without pressure. And to an avoidant, that's intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. They want that closeness, but only if it doesn't cost them control. So instead of choosing fully, they half attach. Instead of committing, they circle. Instead of letting go, they keep you nearby. And suddenly you're in this strange position where you feel important, but never prioritized, needed, but never claimed. And here's the part that most people miss. You didn't audition for this role. You were assigned it quietly. You became the person they texted when life overwhelmed them, the one they opened up to when things fell apart elsewhere. The one who listened without judgment. The one who stayed calm when they pulled away. You became the emotional constant in a life built around emotional distance. And because you didn't demand immediate clarity, they never gave it. Because you didn't threaten to leave, they never feared losing you. And because you loved in a grounded, steady way, they never felt urgency. That's the paradox. Avoidants don't chase stability. They rely on it, and reliance without risk creates complacency. If you're listening to this and thinking, but they said they cared, you're not wrong. They did, but care without action is how avoidants survive intimacy. They feel deeply in moments, then detach to regulate. They connect, then retreat. And you, without realizing it, became the emotional home base they could return to without ever fully moving in. That's what a backup plan really is. Not someone they don't value, but someone they don't have to fight for. Someone they assume will still be there. Someone whose presence feels guaranteed. And that assumption is what eventually changes everything. Because there are signs. There were always signs. Not dramatic ones, subtle ones. The kind you explain away because nothing feels bad enough to leave. Conversations that stayed surface level, right when they started to get real. Intimacy followed by emotional distance. Promises that felt sincere, but vague. Plans that were always flexible on their end, but solid on yours. You noticed how they reached out when they were lonely, stressed, or uncertain, but went quiet when things stabilized. You noticed how you were emotionally included, but not fully integrated into their life. And each time something didn't add up, you chose patience over confrontation. You chose understanding over boundaries. And that choice slowly trained them how to treat you. But here's the shift that no one warns you about. The moment you stop chasing clarity, the moment you stop being available on demand, the moment you pull your emotional energy back, not to punish, not to manipulate, but because something inside you finally says, I deserve to be chosen without auditioning, that's when the dynamic changes, and it doesn't change loudly. It changes quietly. Your absence doesn't register immediately. Avoidants don't panic when you leave. They panic when they feel the space where you used to be, and space takes time to echo. At first, they assume you're just busy. Then they assume you'll come back. Then they realize something feels off. The texts don't land the same. The reassurance isn't there. The emotional safety they leaned on is suddenly unavailable. And that's when the nervous system reacts. Not with love confessions, not with dramatic gestures, with unease, with restlessness, with that subtle internal question they hate asking. What if they're gone? That's when you stop being the backup plan and start becoming the reference point, the one they compare others to, the one who felt different in hindsight. But none of this happens if you don't foresee the truth clearly. You weren't failing to be chosen. You were succeeding at being safe. And safety without boundaries teaches people they can keep you without committing to you. The moment you stop offering emotional access without emotional reciprocity, the entire structure collapses. Because avoidance can only keep backups as long as the backup stays in position. The second you step out of that role, they feel the loss in a way they never felt your presence. And that's the part that stays with them. Not the fights, not the explanations, the quiet withdrawal of someone who finally knows their worth. The absence of the one who made them feel regulated without ever asking for more. That's not easily replaced. That's not easily forgotten. And even if they never say it out loud, even if they move on quickly, even if they pretend it didn't matter, the imprint stays. Because you weren't just an option. You were the emotional baseline, the calm they didn't appreciate until it was gone. And this is where the story turns. Not because you decided to become colder or more strategic, but because something inside you finally went quiet. The chasing stopped first, not dramatically, not with a speech, just a soft withdrawal of effort. You stopped filling the gaps they left. You stopped reaching out to smooth over distance. You stopped reminding them you existed, and for the first time, your energy was no longer chasing connection. It was protecting dignity. That moment matters more than you realize, because avoidants are wired to feel safety when someone is predictable. When you were always there, they didn't have to think about losing you. When you became still, they didn't panic right away. They assumed you'd return to your place. That's the mistake. Because what actually changed wasn't your behavior, it was your position. Your silence didn't scream, it whispered. And whispers are far more disturbing to someone who relies on emotional distance to stay regulated. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, maybe even weeks. On the surface, they looked fine, busy, distracted, normal, but internally something shifted. The nervous system noticed the absence before the mind could explain it. The emotional safety they leaned on was gone, and there was no replacement ready. This is the part people misunderstand. Avoidants don't miss people when they leave. They miss people when they're no longer emotionally available. And you didn't disappear physically. You disappeared emotionally. You stopped offering reassurance without reciprocity. You stopped holding space for inconsistency, and that created a vacuum. They didn't know how to fill. This is when the internal bargaining starts. They replay interactions, not to understand you, but to reassure themselves that they still matter to you. They check their phone more often. They reread old conversations. They feel a subtle irritation that doesn't have a clear source. They might even tell themselves they don't care, that they were never that invested, that you were replaceable. But the body doesn't lie the way the mind does. Restlessness creeps in, sleep feels lighter, distraction doesn't work as well, and there's this low-grade discomfort that hums underneath everything else. Not heartbreak, not yet, just unease. The feeling of losing control without understanding why. And here's the twist. The reason your silence hits harder than any argument ever could is because arguments still keep you engaged. Arguments still signal emotional availability. Silence signals finality. It signals self-respect. It signals that you no longer need to be understood to move on. And to an avoidant, that's terrifying because they rely on emotional ambiguity to stay safe. The moment things become clear, even quietly clear, they feel exposed. They don't know where they stand anymore. They don't know if you'll come back. And that uncertainty is exactly what you lived with the entire time. This is when the internal panic starts, but it doesn't look like panic. It looks like curiosity, like casual check-ins, like indirect engagement, a reaction to your absence masked as indifference. They might reach out just to see how you're doing. They might like something you post. They might find reasons to re-enter your orbit without committing to anything real because they want reassurance without vulnerability. They want to know you're still there without having to step forward. But something is different now. You don't respond the same way. You don't rush. You don't over-explain. And every neutral response confirms the fear they won't name, that you're no longer emotionally positioned beneath them. Inside, something destabilizes. Because for the first time, they're imagining life without your presence regulating theirs. They're realizing how often they leaned on your consistency, how often they offloaded stress onto your calm, how often they took your availability for granted. And this realization doesn't come as gratitude. It comes as loss. A loss they didn't prepare for because they never thought you'd leave the role you were assigned. That's when you quietly become the one that got away. Not because you were perfect, but because you were grounding, and grounding is rare. This is where the story rewrites itself in their head. Suddenly, moments that felt ordinary to you become emotionally charged in memory. Conversations feel deeper in hindsight. Your patience feels extraordinary. Your presence feels irreplaceable. This isn't romance blooming late. It's regret catching up. Avoidants don't idealize during the relationship. They idealize after it's safe to do so. When there's no risk of dependence. When you're no longer there to disrupt their autonomy. That's when they allow themselves to feel the full weight of what you meant. And that's when you stop being the backup plan and start being the benchmark. Anyone new enters their life and gets unconsciously compared to you, not because you were dramatic or intoxicating, but because you felt familiar, safe, real. Others might be exciting, intense, or unpredictable, but they don't regulate the same way. They don't offer calm without conditions. They don't feel like emotional home. And even if the avoidant moves on quickly, even if they appear unbothered, the comparison happens silently. You become the reference point they didn't know they were creating while you were still there. And the cruel irony is this: you didn't do anything extraordinary to earn this place in their memory. You didn't manipulate, you didn't withhold to gain power. You simply stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped shrinking to maintain connection. You stopped accepting half-presence as enough. And that shift, that quiet reclaiming of self, changed the entire dynamic. 'Cause the moment you stopped trying to be chosen, you became unforgettable. What they lost wasn't just you. It was the version of themselves that felt regulated around you. The ease, the emotional safety net. And once that's gone, it doesn't come back the same way. They can chase distractions. They can attach elsewhere. But the imprint remains because you weren't an option. They tested. You were the standard they failed to meet. And this is where time starts working in a way that feels unfair at first, but eventually makes sense. Avoidants don't feel lost the way others do. They don't collapse in the moment. They don't spiral immediately. Their system is built to delay emotion, not eliminate it. So while you were hurting early, questioning yourself, replaying conversations, wondering what you did wrong, they were numb, functional, detached, almost relieved. That's why it felt so uneven. That's why it felt like you were grieving something they walked away from untouched. But avoidance doesn't erase emotion. It shelves it, and shelves always break eventually. The regret doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives in fragments, in quiet moments, when distraction fails, in late nights, when the noise fades, and the body finally has room to feel. It arrives when something stressful happens, and there's no familiar calm waiting on the other end. When they want to talk, but realize the person who used to listen without judgment isn't there anymore. That's when the timeline flips. You heal forward, they feel backward, and by the time the weight hits them, you're already standing somewhere new. At first, the regret feels like irritation, a sense that something is off, that life feels less anchored. They might tell themselves they're just lonely, that they miss companionship in general, but then specific memories surface. The way you handled their silence without exploding, the way you stayed grounded when things got tense, the way you made space without demanding explanations. And suddenly the regret sharpens, because loneliness can be solved. Loss of emotional safety can. This is when they start asking questions they avoided before, not out loud, internally. Questions like, why did they stay as long as they did? Why didn't I show up differently? Why does nothing feel the same now? These questions don't come with self-awareness at first. They come with discomfort, with a sense that something valuable slipped through their hands while they were busy protecting themselves. And that's the hardest realization for someone who values control above all else, to realize their need for control cost them the one thing that made life feel steady. They might try to replace you. This part matters, because from the outside, replacement can look like confirmation that you were never important. New connection, new attention, new energy. And if you're not careful, you'll interpret this as proof that you were disposable. But replacement isn't the same as replication. Avoidants replace quickly because novelty doesn't threaten them. New people don't ask for depth right away. New dynamics don't carry expectations. But novelty wears off. And when it does, the comparison begins. No one else listens the same way. No one else offers calm without conditions. No one else feels familiar in chaos. And this isn't because you were perfect. It's because you were emotionally present without being invasive. You offered stability without possession. That combination is rare, and once experienced, it becomes a reference point, even if they never admit it, even if they never reach out, even if pride keeps them silent. The body remembers what safety felt like. There's a moment, usually unexpected, when it fully lands. When they realize you're not coming back in the same way, that you're not waiting, that the role you once played is gone for good. This moment doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with stillness, a quiet understanding that they misjudged the situation, that they assumed access they no longer have, that the person who made things easier is no longer available to soften the edges of their life. This is when the story starts rewriting itself in their head. Avoidants are masters of reframing, but this time it's not to escape pain. It's to make sense of it. They remember you differently now, kinder, more patient, more important. They minimize their own distance and amplify your presence, not intentionally, automatically. The mind does this to cope with regret, to soften the blow of missed opportunity. And suddenly, you're no longer too available or too understanding. You're rare, you're different, You're the one they didn't appreciate in real time. This rewrite doesn't mean they suddenly become emotionally mature. It doesn't mean they'll show up healed and accountable. Sometimes it just means you live rent free in their memory while they continue the same patterns elsewhere. And that can feel unsatisfying because part of you wants acknowledgement. Part of you wants them to say, I see it now. But closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes it comes from realizing that being unforgettable is not the same as being chosen, and that you no longer need either. Because while they're stuck in reflection, something else has been happening quietly on your end. You've been reclaiming your power. Not power over them, power over yourself. You've learned what it feels like to stop proving your worth, to stop explaining your need, to stop waiting for someone to meet you halfway when they've shown you they won't. And that shift is permanent. Even if they come back, even if they reach out, even if they finally say the right words, you're not the same person who accepted crumbs and called it connection. This is the real power shift. Not when they miss you, but when you no longer need to be missed to feel validated. When you understand that being someone's backup was never a reflection of your value, it was a reflection of their capacity. When you see clearly that the role you played was unsustainable because it required you to abandon yourself, and once you stop doing that, the dynamic can never return to what it was. They might feel the loss forever, quietly, privately, in moments that catch them off guard, but you move forward with clarity, with boundaries, with a deeper understanding of what you deserve. And that's the ending most people don't talk about. Not revenge, not reunion, just growth, just the calm confidence of knowing that you were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And that's why the story matters. Because being someone's backup plan doesn't mean you were forgettable. It means you were safe enough to be taken for granted. And once you're gone, that safety becomes the thing they can't replace. And somewhere along the way, something unexpected happens. You stop wanting them the way you used to. Not because the feelings magically disappear, but because clarity arrives. You start to see the relationship without the fog of hope. You see how much emotional labor you carried, how often you minimized your needs to keep the peace, how frequently you confused patience with love. And once you see that clearly, desire changes shape. It softens. It loosens its grip. You're no longer driven by the need to be chosen by someone who never fully chose themselves. This detachment doesn't come with bitterness. That's the surprising part. It comes with calm, with a grounded understanding that love isn't supposed to feel like waiting in a quiet room, hoping someone will finally show up. You realize that longing wasn't proof of depth. It was proof of imbalance, and the moment that truth settles in, your nervous system begins to relax. You breathe differently. You respond differently. You move through life without that constant background anxiety of wondering where you stand. And that's when the avoidant feels at most. Not because you're gone, but because you're no longer energetically tethered to them. There's no tension to pull on, no emotional thread they can tug to feel reassured. You've stepped out of the dynamic entirely, and that's deeply unsettling to someone who relied on your steady presence to regulate their emotional distance. Because now, even if they think about you, they can't access you, and access, not affection, is what they miss most. There's a lesson here that avoidance learned too late, if they learn it at all. People who offer consistency without control are rare. People who love without consuming are rare. People who stay grounded while allowing others space are rare. And when you treat that kind of presence as optional, you don't just lose a person, you lose a standard. You lose the quiet baseline that made everything else feel manageable. And once that's gone, every new connection feels louder, harder, more unstable by comparison. This is why they'll always compare others to you, even if they never say your name. In moments of stress, they'll think of how you would have handled it. In moments of conflict, they'll remember how you stayed calm. In moments of emotional overwhelm, they'll feel the absence of your steadiness. And that comparison isn't romantic. It's neurological. The body remembers regulation, the mind remembers safety, and once experienced, it becomes the template, even if the avoidant resists admitting it. But the most important shift isn't happening on their side. It's happening on yours. You start to redefine what connection means. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop seeing emotional distance as mysterious or deep. You start valuing presence, reliability, mutual effort. You realize that real intimacy doesn't require you to disappear parts of yourself to make someone else comfortable. And with that realization comes a new kind of confidence, quiet, unshakable, not loud enough to prove anything, just strong enough to walk away from what doesn't serve you. You also stop rewriting the past to excuse their behavior. You allow the full truth to exist without softening it. They cared, yes, but they didn't show up in the ways that mattered. They leaned on you without fully holding you. They benefited from your emotional availability without offering the same in return. And acknowledging that doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. And honesty is what finally sets you free. This is where the title becomes clear. You were never just a backup plan. You were the emotional foundation they relied on while avoiding commitment. You were the safe place they visited without ever intending to move into. And when you left that role, everything shifted. You became the one they'll never forget. Not because you tried to be unforgettable, but because you represented something they didn't know how to keep. They'll carry that with them into future relationships, into quiet moments, into the spaces where distraction doesn't reach. And you'll carry something too, but lighter, a deeper understanding of yourself, a clearer sense of your worth, a stronger boundary between what feels familiar and what feels healthy. And maybe one day you'll look back on this connection without pain. Not with longing, just with awareness. You'll see it for what it was, a chapter that taught you the difference between being wanted and being chosen, between being needed and being valued, and you'll be grateful you didn't stay long enough to lose yourself completely. Because the final truth is this: you didn't lose someone who couldn't choose you. They lost someone who would have stayed if they had. And that's a loss that echoes longer than regret ever could. You were never meant to be an option. You were always the standard.